Well, Jonathan Hall, independent reviewer of terrorism legislation, is here with us now. It's good to see you. Thanks for joining us on the programme this morning. What do you want to see from this inquiry?
I would like to see a very full account of the facts, actually. I'm always sceptical about whether inquiries are good at changing the law, because judges and people in charge of inquiries are good at looking at the facts. They don't have access to all the policymakers. So I think just actually a full account of what happened to try and dispel some of this fog of disinformation. And so it's welcome from that respect. In terms of changing the law, I mean, I actually have been tasked by the Home Secretary to look at whether you need to adjust the definition of terrorism. And I mean, what I'd say about that, if I may, is I'm slightly sceptical about making changes of the law to include more people within terrorism. So I think the Prime Minister spoke yesterday about why not include people whose violence literally terrorises people? Why not include them within the definition? And I think the problem I have with that, although I'm going to look at it with an open mind, is it might include lots of people, like organised criminals, football hooligans and the like. So I understand the point about labelling. I see that the public say, well, why is this terrible, terrible attack not called terrorism, to mark how serious it is? But I'm also slightly worried about how you change the law to achieve that without getting far too many people in. And I think the other thing, I mean, whether the inquiry can do this or not, and I suspect not, is you can't make false promises to the public. So just calling something terrorism is not going to suddenly bring all the resources that you need to actually catch people and stop them before they carry out attacks. And the false promise might be saying, well, it's terrorism, but actually behind the scenes, counter-terrorism police and MI5 are quite stretched. They've got a lot of other terrorists to deal with, and they've got all these state threats as well. They've got Russian saboteurs, they've got Chinese spies. So let's see what the truth is. In terms of changing the law, I'm going to look at that, but I'm slightly sceptical. I think the real thing is what resources can be committed to these violent obsessives.
In your considered opinion, and obviously he has pleaded guilty, he will be sentenced tomorrow, and anyway, we can't prejudice a judge. But the fact that ricin and a terror manual were downloaded and found at his home, what influence or how much should that be taken into account with what happened with those little girls?
It just depends on the fact. I think he downloaded the manual in 2021.
Still had it.
He had it, I know, but we're talking about an attack in 2024 and what the prosecutor, and I'm sure tomorrow, when they lay their facts out to the sentence, they will make it clear to the judge and to the public what their thinking process was. But the question is, what on earth was in that mind, apart from sheer evil, in 2024? And in order to say that it was connected to terrorism, they would have to prove beyond reasonable doubt that he was doing to pursue some religious or political motive. And I mean, all I can tell is that they've looked at that and they just can't get it across the line.
And as far, again, in your considered opinion, as far as the Prime Minister is concerned, he withheld information because he said it would prejudice the trial. Would it?
I'm a little sceptical about whether he's completely right about that. I should say, it's not for me to exonerate him, but I'm absolutely sure the Prime Minister and the CPS were not engaged in some sort of conspiracy. Their posture will have been ultra caution. They've got this incredibly important trial. The last thing they want to do is to see any risk, any tiny percentage of a risk that could jeopardise it. And that's their posture. I think the problem with ultra caution is it has consequences. It had consequences both in terms of the disinformation and the riots. And you could say, well, I'm a complete purist. I'm going to say nothing about it and the police can deal with the riots. I think the other thing that hasn't been taken account of is actually the effect of all that disinformation was to create this conspiracy theory that's still around. And if there had been a trial, the jury probably would have had that conspiracy theory in their minds as well. So actually not giving a sober, honest, accurate account, I think probably led by the police at the time, does allow quite damaging disinformation to come in. I think the only way of resolving it is probably to get a spreadsheet now, use this as a sort of test bed, look at the information that would like to have been given to the public and say, get two lawyers in a room and say, would that really, on the facts of this case, have damaged or risked any prejudice to the trial, bearing in mind the facts of the case, which are that he was only ever going to be convicted of murder or manslaughter. So I think I'd like to see that. I think that if you did that exercise, you'd probably find that more could have been said than the Prime Minister allows, but probably less than some of his opponents.
Oh, you're such a lawyer. Prevent, is it fit for purpose?
No, not completely. So Prevent was developed in the 2000s. Al-Qaeda, emirs, radicalisers. The whole point was to catch people with their ideology. And if you saw someone preaching an ideology that you associated with, say, Anwar al-Awlaki, who is this very famous English-speaking al-Qaeda guy, then you'd go in, pounce and stop them. That was before the sort of internet era. And now, because people are not getting it from human beings, and you can't sit them down in front of a scholar and say, your version of Islam, violent version of Islam, is wrong or is contrary to mainstream scholarly opinion, how do you deal with it? And Prevent has never really come up with an answer to that. So I do think that Prevent, maybe it works for those old school Islamists who are still around, but it doesn't work for the young kids.
So what's the answer?
I think the answer is either to expand Prevent. So there was a review by Sir William Shawcross that really tried to focus it back on ideology. See why he did it, but I think actually probably in the long run that was a mistake. So either you need to allow it to look at school massacres and things like that, or you bring in a parallel system. But the key thing is, what do you do if a kid is in his room looking at really violent, gory images? That's not ideological. So sitting them down and talking to them about their radicalising views is not going to work. How do you deal with that? Does the system have experts, or just people who understand what it's like to be on the internet all day, and what might dissuade them from looking at that? So there's that. And I mean, there may be bigger pictures as well about what you can actually do about the internet. I mean, you hear about, well, tech companies got to take this stuff down. All I would say is it's very, very difficult to achieve because of the US First Amendment. We are not in control of the internet. Ofcom has got an enormous job in administering the Online Safety Act. I'm quite sceptical about whether it will be able to do as much as it thinks it will be able to do, or says it ought to be able to do under the law. It may be we have to look at things like, I don't know, people going online anonymously, children having access to smartphones, those sort of bigger, more sort of human things, rather than saying to the tech companies, I mean, it's obviously disgraceful what is on the internet, but where they're cutting costs, when they're getting rid of moderators, where they're committed to free speech, I think it's a bit unrealistic to say that it's going to disappear anytime soon.
Final thought, going back to the inquiry, how quickly would you like it to report?
I think as quickly as possible. I agree. I mean, this is a general comment, but many inquiries have been launched and they often take far, far too long. I hope it's as speedy as possible.
OK. What does that mean in numbers?
I don't know. I mean, we'll see what the remit of it is. But I mean, if it doesn't report until the next government, then I don't think it's going to do its job. So I would hope maybe 2 years.
Good to see you.
Thank you very much.